This is the first step in a series of short YouTube videos to tell you how I would teach somebody conversation skills. For the sake of simplicity here, I just use a couple of abbreviations. V is for verb. This is the positive, and Q is for question. So the first thing I ever teach a student and make sure they feel comfortable with is how to make a positive question with a verb. Now, the students don't need to know what a verb is. They don't need to know what positive means. I know what it means. I know what I want to teach. And this is the goal that I have for that first approach to my student. I'm going to be teaching them how to make a present, a past, and a future question with a verb. Once again, I don't mention to them present, past, and future. This is sort of confusing, especially for young children, to try to distinguish. As an adult, I know if I look at my own language, and I'm assuming here that you know the language, your language is is different than English, that in your language, whatever it is, there are markers or indicators of you're asking a question regarding things in the present, the past, and the future. I speak Korean a bit. I know what these markers are. They're always consistent. They never change. So I know that it makes it very simple if I'm able to show them how to make a question with a verb. I don't lecture them on this. All I want them to do is be able to do this. And how do I do it? I usually focus just on 5 verbs. Pick the verbs you want. I usually try to keep them single syllable. In the long run, when you begin teaching conversation skills, vocabulary is not that important. The important thing is to instill confidence in the student, to be able to ask a question, to gain confidence, to give them a system that they can always fall back on, a group of patterns of way things are done, so that they'll always sound good and not make mistakes. So I write, 5 verbs on the side. Keep it very, very simple. I then start with the present. Once again, not mentioning the present. The way I would do it is if I speak, Korean, for example, I would say this in Korean. And I would tell them this is the way it's done in English. So, and I only use you at the beginning. We'll go into the other forms later, but only you, so they get comfortable, so they get a feel for this. And so in Korean, if I taught a Korean student, I would say in Korean, do you go? And they would have to translate it this way. I then say, do you read? And they would do it this way. Do you eat? Do you write? Do you sleep? I want to see if they're picking up on the do. I'm always using the present. They're coming back to me with the present. I don't worry about mistakes. Mistakes are a springboard to correct them, so I never think of mistakes as bad. Mistakes are good because as a teacher, I want to see where their weaknesses are. But initially, I'm going to make them, with these 5 verbs that I have, I'll say, do you go? Do you eat? Do you read? And then I'll keep mixing it up until I feel comfortable that they've picked it up. Then I will go to the past tense. Once again, I'm not mentioning to them present, past. But I know, as the teacher, that there is a present and a past, and I know that these are the markers in my language that indicate that when I ask a question. So I will tell them, I will translate this for them, did you go? And they say, okay. I say, repeat it, and they say, did you go? And then I say, we're going to change this. And of course, I got my 5 verbs. I'll even put them in front of the student if he wants. And in Korean, I will say to them, are you in your own language? Did you read? And they would have to translate it, did you read? Did you eat? Did you sleep? Did you write? Once again, I'm looking for errors. Once I think that they're comfortable with this, I will mix these up. So in Korean, I would say, for example, do you eat? Did you eat? Did you sleep? Do you sleep? I would mix it up to see if they're catching the nuance in their own language and transferring it to English. If they're not able to do that, I have to try to find a way to help them to distinguish them. Sometimes in Korean, I would write it down in Korean that this is did you go, and I show them that this is the indicator that I use. And that same indicator will come up if I say, do you go, do you eat, do you sleep, do you read? The same thing with did you. I would, if they're having difficulty, I'd write, did you go in Korean? I'd show them where the indicator is and circle go and just say, this is the only thing that's going to change. Did you go? Did you sleep? Did you read? Did you eat? Then I move to the third option, which is will. And in Korean, I will give them example, will you go? I may even write this down for them. It's probably good to write it down. Now that I think of it, you write down, do you go? And you mark what the indicator is. Did you go? So they know it. And now, will you go? I have my 5 verbs I go with, so I have them translate. I say in Korean, will you go? They have to say, will you go? Will you eat? Will you sleep? Will you read? They have to give me that back in English. Then I will mix them up once again. I'm using Korean. They're telling me the English. I want to see if they're recognizing the marker in their own language that indicates this sense of tense in language. I'm not explaining present, past, and future. I'm not getting into that philosophical or reason, it's confusing. But children all can ask a question in the present, past, and the future. They feel comfortable with their own language. If I write in Korean, do you go, did you go, and will you go? They know that those are simple questions. They see what the marker is. They see how their marker in Korean is made for those and how it translates into English. Now, up to this point, I've used very simple verbs. I don't use a lot of verbs, just about 5, and I've run through this exercise with them. I say the Korean, they're translating into English. In the beginning, you may have to, just, if they don't know how to pronounce it, do you go, do you eat, do you sleep, you can have them repeat after you. But I want to know if they're recognizing in their own language this change and shift in tense. The only way I know it is if I say to them in Korean, did you go, and they tell me, and they translate it, will you go, I know there's a misconnect there. So I have to find out what that is. Up to this point, I'm only using you to make it simple. when they feel a bit comfortable with it and, it seems a bit natural, it's new to them, they'll stumble a little bit, that's okay. I then want to show them a little difference here. And that is with singular and plural. Now, once again, singular and plural, it's sort of big words. Simply what it means is this is one person, I, you. In the third person, it's he, she, and a person's name. And two or more people are we, you, and they. You is, two people. Where did you go, your brother and your sister, The reason that I introduce this now is because, especially when we get to adjectives, it's going to become a bit more critical to be familiar with this singular and plural because there's changes that occur. For example, I am, you are, he is, we are, you are, they are. But I'm not going to discuss that with them. I just want to show them that at this point, up to this point, we've only done you, but guess what? We also have these other combinations that can be used instead of you. So I will try to get them used to that. Now, there's lots of exceptions in language. Exceptions should be introduced sparingly so that people don't get overwhelmed with them and begin to feel frustrated. So I introduced the first exception to the question-making skill with a verb, and that is with the third person. Instead of do, does is used. Does he go? Does she go? Does John go? Once again, singular. I don't tell them singular, but this is a little exception in the English language. I know in Korean they don't have this exception, so I don't know in your language, but if it's the same, but I have to explain this difference to them. So then I will, once again, you'll take your list of verbs, the 5 verbs that you have, and just have them repeat after you. Do I go? Do you go? Does he go? Do we go? Do you go? Do they go? Repeat it. Then you're going to I would say in Korean, for example, do we eat? They would have to say, do we eat? I'd say in Korean, do they sleep? They would have to say, do they sleep? I want to see if they're picking up on this change here. Of course, you're like weaving in and out of these, with does and do, making examples to see how comfortable they are with the change and the exception here. So it's not always do you, do you, do you. There's a bit of a change in this part here, which is reflected here. So this is what I do with them. Using those 5 simple verbs, I'm just making examples in Korean. Do we sleep? And they will have to say, do we sleep in English? Finally, I introduced to them the last combination, which is critical, of what, where, why, when, who, and how. These 6, what should I call them? 6 classifications, 6 things, you're going to find throughout the conversation-making skills, you're always coming back to what, where, why, when, who, and how. You have this in your native language. So I would write for them, the Korean equivalent to this, the French equivalent, whatever your language is. They will recognize these are very commonly used, and they're always used with a question. In this segment, in this step, we're only concentrating on the positive. So once again, I have my simple verbs. I ask them to repeat first. What do you eat? Where do you go? Why did you go? When did you go? How will you go? Okay? So we repeat a little bit. Then I'm going to make examples, in simple examples with those verbs in their native language, and see how they translate it back to me. Initially, once again, there's stumbling, a bit of frustration, mistakes, but mistakes are expected. I want to know the mistakes so that I can help them, because mistakes are made consistently, and if you begin to change them at the beginning, they develop good habits. So at the end of the first step with a student, I have not focused on vocabulary. That's very misleading. One of the most frustrating things in the world, just learning vocabulary. It's mind-numbing. What I want to teach them is how you can simply talk. You learn to speak by speaking, and I teach them the first skill in a language, which is how you make a positive question with a verb. Thank you.